Next on the agenda, CAO presentation on the proposed financial plan and 2020 budget. So Council, this is really just the public release of the budget. We will, on November 7th, start the in-depth presentations and questions and debate over certain projects. So, maybe try to keep questions today to a minimum, and we'll try to put them all on November 7th when the public can participate with us. We have a World Cafe budgets. Are you talking about the public engagement part in your?
Yes.
Okay, I won't go into that. I'll let you do that. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Scoble.
All right, thank you. So good evening, Madam Mayor and councillors. So this afternoon I'm introducing the proposed 2020 budget to council for its consideration. Today's presentation is the first of a series of presentation reviews and public meetings over the course of the next few weeks. So the 2018 to 2021 corporate business plan, which was updated in March of this year, serves as the city's roadmap to maintain programs and services and advance priority projects and initiatives for the future. The proposed 2020 budget outlines the city's financial expenses and revenues, including new business cases and capital investments, capital charters, required to maintain and optimize city programs, services, and operations. Although a rolling three-year budget is prepared to enhance the process and reinforce the commitment to long-term fiscal strategies, administration presents a one-year budget for council's approval. This process ensures the most current economic climate and costs associated with delivering services to the community are applied. To plan effectively, administration uses a strategic framework that encompasses the range of planning activities that are carried out to effectively manage the municipal corporation. This structured framework provides clarity, directs the city's future, and provides a balanced approach to achieving long-term plans while focusing on short-term actions. The framework is comprised of the 7 key elements as depicted in the diagram. So administration uses a number of directional documents when developing a proposed financial plan to budget and to ensure that council direction and priorities are actioned and that progress is made towards the community vision. So these documents include the budget and taxation guiding principles, including the services and service levels inventory, the 2018 to 2021 corporate business plan, directly supporting council strategic plan, prioritize capital recommendations, utility fiscal policy, and municipal fees and charges. So a little bit of a look at the environment we're in currently. During financial planning and budgeting, administration also looks at the overall economic environment. So this year, the Municipal Price Index, or MPI, which is the forecasted increase in the cost of a basket of goods typically purchased by a municipality, and includes weighted forecasts for things such as salaries, benefits, materials, commodities, and vehicle maintenance and operation costs. So this year, the forecasted MPI is 3.1%. Assessment growth for 2020 is revenue that the city will receive from new construction and development activity within the city over the last year. This revenue is used to offset growth-related increases in the budget on the premise of growth pays for growth, and is also used to offset increases to current taxpayers. And finally, historical tax increases are also compared to historical MPI, and growth is a bit of a calibration. Are we in line with the economic environment is our goal to evaluate. So this chart shows the 2020 proposed tax increase percentages and the actual historical tax increase percentages for the last 7 years from 2013 to 2019 for St. Albert. The percentage figures represent the average residential municipal and average non-residential municipal tax increases. The electrical franchise fee increase reduced the tax impact by 1% in 2020, or it will, and by 1.4% in 2019, with last year being the first year of the electrical franchise fees. So since 2013, the residential property class has experienced a less than 2.9% tax increase for 8 successive years, with the average 2013 through to the proposed 2020 being 1.6%. And since 2013, the non-residential property class has experienced a less than 3.2% tax increase for 8 successive years, with the average over those years being 2.1%. It is worth noting that in 2019, non-residential rates were stabilized to be comparable to residential rates, and this is being proposed again for 2020, in recognition of the challenges in resiliency that the businesses have been facing with macroeconomic factors and taxation by other levels of government that are out of the city's control. So as shown in this comparison of the municipal price index, consumer price index, and St. Albert residential tax increases, there can be some significant differences between the MPI and the CPI. In 2013, the MPI was about 1.7% higher than the CPI, and in 2016, the CPI was about 0.6% higher than the MPI. This shows that swings can occur between these two measures. So as shown, tax increases have been less than the MPI for the past 5 years, and in some years have a significant difference between those two factors. So as the St. Albert MPI is heavily weighted on salaries and benefits and contracted services, the forecasted increase over the next 4 years in MPI is mainly driven by the forecasted growth in average wages in Alberta as the economy recovers, as predicted by the wage inflation forecast Alberta, the Industrial Composite Index. Over time, St. Albert tax increases should be more consistent to the municipal price index than the consumer price index. The city continues to hold its property tax increases to levels below the MPI. This means the city has succeeded in continually finding cost efficiencies in its operations so it can purchase more costly goods and services at prices that have increased at a rate higher than our property tax increase. While a dollar doesn't go as far as it did 8 years ago, the city is still maintaining levels of service on fewer relative dollars. In terms of numbers, the cost efficiencies realized translate to about 6% savings over the past 7 years relative to the municipal price index, or about 0.9% savings per year on average for residential tax increases. For an average St. Albert home in St. Albert, that's a little bit of a double redundancy, but anyways, which we will show in a few slides, this means the city of St. Albert is charging about $229 per year less in taxes than what we would be charging if we weren't absorbing the MPI factor cost increases and we were just going with the MPI every year. We're also doing better than CPI with residential taxation over the past 7 years, which of course is consumer oriented and not necessarily costs the cities incurs. This is things like food, shelter, household operations and furnishings, clothing and footwear, transportation, health and personal care, recreation, education, and reading and alcoholic beverages and tobacco products. So we're doing about 4% better than CPI increases over the past 7 years, or about 0.6% per year on average. We have likewise passed these cost efficiencies relative to the MPI cost pressures onto our non-residential taxpayers, with about 1.3% savings over the past 7 years, or about 0.2% per year on average. In terms of CPI, we have been slightly higher than the CPI increases for non-residential taxes at about 1% higher than CPI for the past 7 years, which is about 0.14% on an annual basis. So it's worth noting again in 2020 that it is year 2 of 3 years of implementing electrical franchise fees, which is the allocation of user pays philosophy on consumers of electricity without taxpayer subsidization, and thus produces relief to taxpayers. If the electrical franchise fees had not been implemented, tax increases for both residential and non-residential taxpayers would still be below the cumulative MPI increases over the past 7 years. So this performance in cost efficiencies over this period, combined with below average operating costs per capita and the third lowest debt per capita in the province relative to comparable communities, has showed ongoing restraint in St. Albert and has positioned us well for the further restraint needed in the coming years. Also noted on this figure is the 1.5 repair, maintain, replace charge for building funds for upcoming replacement of assets currently in our inventory approaching end of life. This is the first year of 3 years investment as per council direction to ensure the quality of life provided by our current assets is prudently maintained. Not undertaking this will result in the longer term in infrastructure and noticeably poor quality, typical of some communities in other parts of Canada I have visited. Perhaps that will be a more common debate in these times of further restraint. Do we let the quality of our infrastructure that St. Albert has come to be known for and expect deteriorate to forego the associated tax impacts? The city's 10-year municipal growth plan is robust and supports the future growth and development of St. Albert over the long term. However, as our asset complement grows, so too does our obligation to efficiently manage those assets. In the past, St. Albert, like all municipalities, has relied heavily on the provision of government granting opportunities to help resource this work. Federal and provincial grants have been used to fund our capital plan for utilities growth and to repair, maintain, and replace infrastructure. Although we are always grateful for these grants, we need to move away from our dependency on them. In light of the recently released provincial budget, as well as the anticipated expiry of the Municipal Sustainability Initiative grant program, it is imperative that the city adopt more prudent fiscal strategies in business planning and budget development to ensure the most effective allocation of resources relative to the city's most critical needs. Again, we need to reduce our reliance on grants from other levels of government. Our growing community means we need to provide residents with new facilities, but the city does face a shortfall in funding for new capital projects. To date, difficult decisions have been made and nearly $128 million was eliminated from the growth capital list, but the shortfall for the remaining items is nearly $245 million. So we need to find new ways to fund new infrastructure. So a quick synopsis is we are highly leveraged on residential tax with our tax ratio at 80-20, the second highest in the region, which means our residents fund the majority of the tax burden and are more price sensitive to tax increases as a result. While rationalized, we still have a deficit in our growth capital budget, and additional investment is required in our RMR assets if we are to maintain the quality of life that these assets provide. On the expense side, as shown, the city has shown restraint for many years, outperforming increases in the costs we bear to produce efficiencies. So while much effort is going into and continues to go into rationalizing the expense side of the equation with initiatives such as priority-based budgeting, which we'll fully implement in the 2021 budget, we also have to look at the revenue side of the equation. Over the past few years, we have seen reductions in traditional sources of revenue, such as funding from other levels of government and photo radar revenues. Decline in these other sources of revenue means they either have to be made up from other traditional sources of revenue, such as taxation, user fees and penalties, and utility rates. Further restraint has to be shown on the expense side of the equation, or new offsetting revenue sources have to be found. So finding new revenue sources is one of the major thrusts of Council's strategic plan and the supporting corporate business plan. The Q3 update discussing the strategic plan is coming to Council shortly. Tonight's focus is on our current situation and the associated budget for next year. But the strategic plan and the budget are symbiotic with each other, so what happens with one impacts the other. With the release of the provincial budget last Thursday, the city will have to find ways to show further restraint and or find offsetting revenue by one of the methods discussed. At the end of this presentation, we'll have a supplemental presentation which outlines an initial review of the provincial budget impacts to the city of St. Albert. So with this in mind, the proposed budget focuses on the following areas: doing what we do well through delivery of existing services and service levels, executing on priorities and strategic and emerging initiatives through direction given by Council, optimizing services and service delivery to continuously meet community needs and, where possible, preferences, focusing on long-term sustainability. Everything we do should benefit us in three ways: socially, fiscally, and environmentally. And the city is focused on developing sustainable business practices through revenue generation opportunities, cost-saving initiatives, process efficiency improvements, and the creation of regional partnerships and collaborative opportunities where appropriate. We need to take new and innovative approaches if we are to identify new sources of revenue that minimize future tax increases and enable us to continue providing the programs and services valued by residents and businesses. In terms of services provided and their associated service levels, 82% of the city's proposed budget is used for services provided directly to the community. The City of St. Albert delivers a complement of services related to community safety, such as police services and fire services, community social support and development, planning and economic development, transit, environmental sustainability, public works and engineering, culture and heritage programming, recreation and sports programming, and many community events. The city maintains the services and service levels inventory that outlines the city's key services delivered to the community and associated service levels that will be maintained in the proposed budget. In terms of, in terms of supporting current service levels, 4 base business cases are proposed for the 2020 budget. These business cases are considered non-discretionary and include increasing the annual software support budget to accommodate approved new corporate software applications such as system upgrades and licenses, providing geographic information system support to emergency services to maintain service levels, Contributing to Edmonton Global based on its approved annual budget, less federal and provincial grants. This is shared among member municipalities and shareholders proportional to the tax assessment base and population. And providing a 4-month co-op placement for a student enrolled in an HR program. The city will utilize this temporary employee to offset peak demands and ensure responsibilities are redistributed to the appropriate levels within the department. In terms of optimizing services and advancing priorities, 7 growth business cases are proposed as necessary to optimize the services provided to the community, to meet regulations, and/or to advance priorities. These initiatives are funded from new assessment growth and reallocation from the vacant FTE pool, thus having no tax impact to residents. These investments include hiring 10 emergency services personnel to ensure service levels are adequate when Fire Station 4 is opened in 2023. This includes 1 assistant chief medical liaison position to ensure all duties related to emergency medical responses have proper oversight. Increasing security in the HR and safety department workspace, offering additional health and safety and risk mitigation controls for employees and public within that space. Providing funds to the Rental Assistance Program Fund, RAP, which will be depleted in late 2019, and the crisis funds will be depleted in Q2 of 2020. These funds are required to avoid residents succumbing to crisis and to assist vulnerable residents in maintaining housing. Conducting public engagement in support of the next major revision to the Smart City Master Plan. Improving audio-visual technical support capacity to council meetings and administration boardrooms. Addressing legislative requirements to provide any worker working alone an effective communication system that includes regular contact by the employer or designated at the appropriate intervals. And providing software to assist users and purchasing in the drafting of tender documents and in the ability to accept electronic tenders and manage the receipt of electronic evaluation of the tender process. This will be more efficient for both vendors seeking to work for the city and the city in processing the tenders received. So a little bit of, I dare say, red tape reduction there. The RCMP will speak to a business case for council consideration in a separate presentation later in the process. So with the background behind building the proposed budget, we're going to switch gears now to introduce the different components of it. The city budget is divided into 2 sections, municipal and utility. Within the municipal and utility sections, it's further subdivided into the operating and capital budget. The municipal operating budget has both base and growth components, and the capital budgets on both the municipal and utility sides have repair, maintain, replace, and growth components. So we'll present first the proposed municipal budget. So in summary, the 2020 proposed municipal budget has an associated 2.4% increase consisting of 1.5% related to infrastructural capital funding for the RMR program and a 0.9% increase related to maintaining current services. I'm proud of the continued work by administration to find cost efficiencies, reducing the initial tax requirement to 0.9%, which is much lower than the inflationary increase we're seeing with the municipal price index. Through corporate restructuring in late 2018, vacant FTE funds were made available to address future needs for frontline positions, as well as provide future years' tax relief. The total vacant dollars remaining within the vacancy pool is $0.5 million, of which $0.3 million is being used to support the emergency services personnel business case, and the remainder applied to offset the base tax increase. So this is for the 2020 portion of the 3-year business case. There are 4 business cases costing $399,000 to maintain services and 7 growth business cases valued at $1.5 million. The proposed capital budget consists of 29 repair, maintain, and replace projects valued at $39.6 million, which was approved by Council in June, and 16 growth projects valued at $53.9 million. Administration is proposing 5 capital projects totaling $47.8 million to be funded from long-term debt. If Council chooses to fund these projects through debt, the city's current debt outstanding would increase to $90.5 million, which remains well under the city and provincial debt limit. To maintain service levels, the city requires a net tax requirement of $108 million, resulting in a $2.5 million increase. This equates to a 2.4% tax increase. The increase in revenue of 4.1% is primarily related to the electrical franchise fee revenue, interest revenue, sales and user fees, and the 30% portion of assessment growth applied to the base, offset by a decrease in fines. The increase in operational expenses of 3% is related to salaries and benefits and associated contingencies, the transit contract, and additional maintenance for buses, contracted services for base business cases, and the 1.5% increase related to the infrastructure funding strategy, which is being offset by a reduction of the vacant FTE pool. The new assessment growth is forecast to be 1.7 million, bringing the municipal operating tax levy to $109.7 million. Looking at the tax impact for an average house costing $450,000, the homeowner could expect a $3,695 property tax bill, which results in an $84 change from 2019. The distribution of tax dollars to the various service categories is illustrated in the slide. As previously mentioned, 82% of property taxes go to front-facing services for residents and businesses, and 18% is allocated to governance and corporate management activities, which in addition to the budget for council's activities includes functions such as legislative services, legal services, human resources, finance, strategic services, assessment, taxation, and innovation and technology services, which support the front-facing departments in their service delivery to residents and council. So we'll now look at the municipal capital budget. So the 10-year municipal capital plan has identified approximately $653 million in capital investment, of which $284 million is attributed to RMR projects, and the remaining $369 million is for growth-related initiatives. The plan includes various projects ranging from improvements to civic buildings, major road expansions and alignments, and replacement of mobile equipment. As indicated by the projected available funding line, the gray line, the city currently faces a significant funding shortfall over the next 10 years, which results in limited ability to fund future growth projects. Given the funding deficit, administration has prioritized capital projects against the council-approved prioritization matrix to establish a recommended list of growth capital initiatives. The recommendation considers future funding requirements over the next 3 to 4 years. So in terms of the RMR projects, as we'd said earlier, 29 projects at $39.6 million, and growth with 16 projects at $53.9 million. The city's capital infrastructure is grouped into 7 main asset categories. This has been established to assist in understanding the allocation or the type of infrastructure the city invests in. The categories include civic facilities, which supports required structural improvements and features to civic facilities. Examples include Fire Station 1 and number 4. Historical and cultural is the preservation of historical and cultural significance. Nothing is being recommended in 2020. Land and land improvements supports initiatives relating to land improvements and the requirement to purchase land. So examples include the Public Works snow storage site. The fourth category is master plan studies and others, which establishes direction and plans for required current infrastructure. Examples include the Lakeview Badger Lands Area Structure Plan and the Community Amenities Site Planning. This category is really preparation and planning for all the other asset categories. Mobile and other equipment is management of scheduled maintenance and replacement of existing assets. Examples include replacement plans for emergency services and Public Works mobile equipment, fire aerial apparatus, and a Fire Station number 4 fire engine. Parks and Trails supports repair and replacement of existing city parks and trails. This year's recommended scope includes the Clone Park West construction, neighborhood park development, and the Woodlands Skate Park redevelopment. And the final category is roads and other engineered structures, which supports rehabilitating transportation networks, signage, and sidewalks. Examples include the city's ongoing Safe Journeys to School implementation strategy, roadway programs, and Ray Gibbon Drive corridor improvements. So now we'll introduce the proposed utility budget. In summary, the 2020 proposed utility budget has an associated 0.05% increase. This increase is comprised of minor inflationary increases as per the municipal price index discussion. The proposed capital budget consists of 14 repair, maintain, and replace projects, which were approved by council in June, valued at $11.6 million, or 100% of the total budget, with no growth projects recommended for 2020. So in terms of the utility rates, the estimated average household monthly rate increase for 2020, as we said, is 0.05%, which goes to $133.37, so a 6 cents increase. This slight increase is due to the incremental increases in supply costs and operating expenses. The proposed capital budget for the utility consists of 14 projects totaling $11.6 million, and the utility infrastructure is grouped into 4 main asset categories by service. So these include water infrastructure. Projects include a rehabilitation of existing infrastructure and the water network level of service, which addresses system limitations with new or upgraded infrastructure to increase capacity and improve fire flows. Wastewater infrastructure projects, again, are rehabilitation and or replacement, and as well level of service improvements to address service limitations or increase in capacity. Storm infrastructure projects this year would include a sedimentation and erosion control plan to reduce impacts to the sturgeon. That's an ongoing project. Infrastructure rehabilitation and level of service work, again, to improve drainage. And in terms of solid waste, the infrastructure proposed for 2020 is limited to an upgrade of the recycle yard. So to sum up this afternoon's presentation, the 2020 budget has been introduced as follows. The proposed municipal budget requires a tax levy of $109.7 million, which represents a 2.4% tax increase. Included in this proposed budget are 4 business cases valued at $399,000, base business cases, and 7 growth business cases valued at $1.5 million. The municipal capital budget consists of 45 projects totaling $93.5 million. And the proposed utility budget requires a rate increase of 0.05%. The proposed utility capital budget consists of 14 projects valued at $11.6 million. So a little bit about the next steps now. This is kind of the process that will be followed through December 16th. So key dates coming up in the process are outlined on the slide. Throughout this process, Council will consider, review, and finalize the following: the municipal and utility operating base budget, new business cases, the 2020 utility rates, and the municipal and utility growth capital. And all of these sessions are open to the public. We're also trying a new tool this year, testing it out. Starting tomorrow, the city is trying a new online platform to engage with our residents. This new tool provides an opportunity for residents to share their thoughts on the proposed budget from the convenience of their own home. Information will be available on the city website at stalbert.ca. Under public participation, and I've actually already seen some social media on it today as well. So that concludes my presentation.
Did you say there was a supplementary one on the provincial budget?
Yes, but I'm going to turn that over to Trevor Dooley here to present that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm the Government Relations Manager for the City of St. Albert, and as Mr. Scoble has stated, last Thursday the province tabled its 2019 to 2020 budget and its 2019 to 2023 fiscal plan. This is effectively an interim budget, as the province will likely introduce its spring budget in either April or March a few months from now. So over the next 2 weeks, it's anticipated the province will announce more details attributed to the budget tabled last week, which St. Albert administration will continue to monitor. I'll start by saying that the city anticipated that the provincial budget could result in revenue reductions, and I'll echo what Mr. Scoble said, that this is why council and administration have been proactive over the past year with respect to reducing our costs, improving our processes, and exploring alternative revenue strategies in order to reduce the city's reliance on other orders of government for funding and to improve the city's overall sustainability. So at this point, I'd like to highlight some of the estimated impacts the provincial budget could have on Council's upcoming 2020 budget deliberations. So some of these figures are just our best estimates at this time, as actual allocations haven't been announced just yet. That's kind of going to happen over the next couple of weeks. But first, looking at MSI Capital, again, the exact allocations for this haven't been confirmed, but we're anticipating a reduction to about $13.8 million in 2020 and then $12.7 million the following year. After that, the MSI agreement expires, and the province has indicated its intent to develop a replacement for MSI called the Local Government Fiscal Framework. So the city can cover the reduction in 2020 and can fund every project that's been recommended. However, the planned reductions will impact future growth funding. What happens in 2022-23 is where the biggest impact could be, subject to the new funding deal with the province. Also with the changes, the 1.5% that council has dedicated for RMR has essentially been offset by the reduction in MSI capital. And also there's only $400,000 in unallocated capital funding. On the MSI operating side, this funding is sustained until MSI expires in 2022-23. The next line item there, the Alberta Community Transit Grant, the city was approved for just over $4 million to purchase some new buses, but city administration got the sense that this grant might be canceled, so we didn't move forward with the procurement process. So there's no impact from a financial point of view at this point. The Municipal Cannabis Transition Program, this was a one-time grant that was awarded over a 2-year time period. It's not being extended into the future. As far as FCSS, police, and libraries go, the province has indicated there's no change in funding to that at this point, although future year allocations have not been determined past 2020. We understand that on the FCSS side of things, it's that ministry's intent that a 3-year funding agreement is developed. With respect to Green Trip, this is a closed out project, which we anticipated would be ending. Grants in place of taxes, so the reduction there, this is a grant the city receives for provincially owned properties in lieu of receiving taxes. So we're looking at a 25% reduction this year, followed by a 50% reduction next year. The Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board has traditionally been awarded a $2 million operating grant from the province each year. And then municipal members top up the remaining budget. We've heard there may be a reduction to this grant. We're still awaiting official confirmation on that. But subject to that confirmation and the board's budget next year, the city could be asked for additional municipal membership contributions to top that budget up. A relatively small impact, the STEP program has been eliminated. The city's used this program in the past to hire summer students in a variety of departments. We typically hire about 10 students a year. And while this has been canceled, we might be able to leverage other grant programs that are administered at a federal level to offset that. So additionally, there are some other more indirect impacts that the city may face stemming from last week's provincial budget. As council will recall, as part of the 2019 tax rate bylaw, Alberta municipalities were instructed to estimate their 2019 education tax levy and incorporate that into their respective tax rate bylaw. Last week, along with the budget, the province announced the 2019 actuals for the education requisition, and St. Albert's finance and assessment team achieved a 0% variance, so we won't be on the hook for any more money. And this is really a good job, well done by our assessors, because not all municipalities are in that same position. So at this point, we're not fully aware of the impact to community organizations that have traditionally relied on provincial grants. Enhancing housing options is a strategic priority within council's strategic plan. And while we don't have the specific impacts yet, as a provincial ministry, seniors and housing, their overall budget was reduced by 3%. Public sector compensation, it will see a 2.1% reduction by 2022-23. And over the next 4 years, the province intends to cut public sector employment by an estimated 7.7%, primarily through attrition. This represents a reduction in 824 ministry staff, 300 post-secondary positions, and 270 positions with the Alberta Energy Regulator. The province also intends to hire more teaching positions and support staff within primary education. And so according to the 2016 federal census, 11% of working St. Albertans reported working in healthcare and social assistance, 10% in public administration, and 9% in educational services. So while this data is a few years old and we can't differentiate from the local, provincial, and federal public sector figures, roughly 30% of our employment base, or over 11,000 residents, work for government, and there could theoretically be some tertiary impacts to our local economy based on the intended compensation reduction and reduction in FTEs. So to close, from administration's initial review of the provincial budget, again, there's some allocations that still need to be confirmed and more kind of announcements that will occur over the next couple of weeks. But it really gives us clarity regarding future fiscal planning, understanding that a new provincial budget will likely be released this spring. So just wanted to highlight some of these anticipated impacts for Council's consideration, as it may be an input during Council's upcoming budget deliberations. Thank you.
Mr. Dooley, I had flagged a potential loss in revenue from fines. Did we get any information on that?
We're still looking into that, Mayor.
Okay, all right. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Mr. Scoble, this is a very conservative, fiscally responsible budget. Like, you have, for 2 years in a row now, just really towed the line on not increasing staffing beyond absolutely what's necessary, which is also why when you come to us in the middle of the year and say, we have this, we need a half an FTE, I believe you, because you have not been asking for 28 new staff every single year, which has been very different from your predecessors. So I just want to really acknowledge that. Couple quick questions. So the 2.4% tax increase, the provincial budget came in after we did all of this. So do we have a strategy, or is the intention just, I'm looking at it's probably about $200,000, right? Is the difference, so it's, which is about a 0.2% tax increase. So is there intention to try to figure out if we can find more cost savings, or what is the plan with that?
Well, we still have to, you know, as Mr. Dooley said, we've still got a few things we've got queries in, and then kind of when we got that, then we'll kind of tally everything up, and then we'll plug it into the budget as proposed, and you know, again, the option is to, the two options really that is currently available is to take something out of the budget to make up for that, or, you know, again, look at the tax side of it, but, you know, that's, we'll sum it up for you, but really that's council's prerogative, what you wish to do in that situation.
Okay, because there hasn't been any direct direction, I was going to say direct direction, from council to do one thing or another. So are you guys also looking at this behind the scenes right now, or is it just really going to be on our court?
Yeah, we're looking at some different scenarios, definitely, but like I said, the first thing to do is complete our information requests and kind of tally that up, and then as we get information, we'll summarize it, pass it along to council with some of the things that could be considered to deal with that.
Okay, perfect. So I look forward to that. So you had a recommendation for the debt, which the debt, again, it was like Ray Gibbon Drive. These are obvious debt choices. So was the 2.4% tax increase assuming that we approved the debt, or not? As like, where were we on that debt?
So the tax impact of the debt actually wouldn't hit in 2020. So
Okay.
because we wouldn't actually take out the debt for probably a year or a year and a half. So there's no actual tax increases related to the debt, just the operating impacts from the 11 new emergency service personnel this year.
Okay. So if we did approve the debt, I'm trying to remember how much it was. It was, one of them was for 26 million, but it would also not be incurred all at once, right? It was incurred over like several years.
That's correct. So we don't borrow it until we actually need the money, because we don't want it sort of sitting in our account.
And my memory slipped me as to what the second debt was. Again, it was justifiable, but what was the second one?
I think it was the North St. Albert Trail.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ray
well,
Gibbon Drive and now the fire.
we're going down that road already, right? So we kind of need to, so, because we approved debt for St. Albert Trail, I thought, last year. So this is a different debt for St. Albert Trail, or am I just not remembering correctly? It could
No,
be.
that's the same as what you approved last year, but we haven't actually incurred any of the costs. We haven't taken any draws out
Okay,
on that debt yet.
but that's been approved already?
Yes, so we have the borrowing bylaw in place and council's approved the project.
Okay. And that's going to be done again over 4 years, right? Ish?
It's, yeah, three or four years.
Okay, so we're looking at like about $12 million a year. Like if I just average the two debts together, about $12 million a year,
That's correct.
which is about a 0.6% tax increase, not starting this year, but the year following.
Correct.
Okay, that's just good so we know what's going on, right? And then I know there's I'm just gonna, I don't have a lot of questions, Mayor Herron, but I'm just trying to get a couple of general things figured out in my head. If we did do the capital, the recreation lands, and we ended up purchasing some lands or whatever, or servicing those lands, would the debt come in? It wouldn't come in place next year, next budget. It would come in when would we start paying for that debt? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let's say we were to purchase it between now and January or something like that.
Yeah, so any of the servicing costs related to the community amenities, obviously it would depend on the timing. I mean, council would have to approve the project to go forward. So just, you know, if a piece of land is selected, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to move ahead with servicing right away. So it would depend when council actually approves that. And then it would take place over probably a couple of years from now. Our next presentation to council on the community amenities will have sort of the full tax impacts and what we think that might look like. So you'll have a better sense, including all of the debt that's coming that's been approved. So we can look at it all stacked on top of each other.
The big picture. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking like if we were to buy it, like if we were to say we're going to get the Landrix land, right? Like they're saying, here it is for whatever, $20 million. Let's just use that round figure. And Rohit's saying the same thing. But if we say we're going to buy it, then we're basically paying for it all up front. It's not going to be in a 4-year continuum, right? Or is that an option? I know that I'm just discussing this, but it's just in my head of trying to figure out the total amount for the year after.
Taking on debt, yeah.
So in all of the proposals from both Landrex and Rohit, the land is being actually provided to the city at no cost.
Oh, so
it's that we're responsible for the servicing piece. So council will have more control on the timing of when that servicing is done.
Well, that's good. But that being said, because we have the 0.6% for the next 4 years, if we end up servicing it, it'll still just add on to that. But we could service it slower too, I guess, like over 2 or 3 years.
We could, and we'll also probably look at some other opportunities, you know, whether there's opportunity to fund any of that servicing through the offset levy recovery fund. Further analysis would need to be done on that, but there are other opportunities we'll look at as well.
Excellent. Just a quick comment about the EME budget, Mayor Herron, because you're the one going down. You tell them to keep their budget down too,
Yep,
right?
I agree. Yep.
Like, they need to go back and look at every single one of the studies they want to spend and whether or not it's actually justifiable before they start asking us for another $30,000 on top of everything else. So, when this all started with the EMRB, it was $30,000 a year, and now we're up to 97, and now up to 120 potentially. So, nothing to do with the administration down here, but like we just need to make sure they actually recognize that it's not just a couple levels of government that need to recognize have a fiscal restraint.
Yeah, I agree. I think the belt tightening needs to happen everywhere.
Yeah, not just on one level here. I had a question, Mr. Scoble, about you had a slide about the funding, and you had like the little graph, and I didn't have a slide number. It had like little and which, right? Like
Our
that's
tax
pretty
increase
specific.
compared to the MPI.
The funding for the amount of capital budget versus how much funding we have coming in, like the draw out versus draw in.
Okay.
Not that one, keep going. It had like little pillars. It was further into your presentation. Up.
There you go.
There we go. Look up. There we go. So the question I had is, so the funding in 2020 is quite high, and then it goes way down. And so I just wanted to help me like put the dots together as to why we're projecting so much lower funding for the future years past 2020.
Spending it all this.
So Councillor Hughes, it's actually more the other way around. So the increase in funding for 2020 is because we've incorporated the debt as new funding coming in for the fire hall. So what you see after that is more our stable funding level.
Okay.
So it's just that because we're proposing debt for this year, that becomes part of the funding.
So
I got to
it's more like
point out.
spending than funding. It's more like what we're spending than funding.
So basically, it's what we've recommended for approved projects in the 2020 budget, and then, but a portion of it is being funded through debt. So that's why that line, the funding line, is so high in 2020.
Okay, thank you for that. It was a lot higher, and I just didn't know how to make that circle all the way around.
Wasn't there a point in time that gray line that's called funding dipped down into below the RMR? So I think we've done some good work on that. So at least it's above RMR
Yeah,
for the next 10 years. So we can at least maintain that.
yeah, that's for sure. And the electrical franchise fee that's being offset for this year, we had that increase. It's about a 0.7% differential, right? Between.
It's actually about 1%. It works out to.
It's 1% less this year.
So because we had, we also had growth. So we're selling more electricity, so we're getting more franchise fees. So it actually worked out to more revenue than we would have based on last year's numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we didn't have the franchise fee, it would be a 3.4% tax increase this year.
That's correct.
Okay. And so that would make more sense because the staffing cost is about 1.5%, and then we had another 1.5% in the capital, plus just we needed to add some more staff, which was the firefighters, et cetera, which would bring it the extra 0.2, 0.3 additional, so that all makes sense now. But the other question, your projection of growth seemed really low, like how much we're expecting to get for growth revenue this year was like 1.7 million, and in the past it's been like 2 or 2.3, so is it just because it just seems a little pessimistic, and so I'm just not sure.
Yeah, no, so our forecasted growth is the second lowest that it's been since 2007, I believe Mr. Dolan told me. And he's been pretty good at being accurately forecasting what that growth is. So I'm pretty confident in that number. Unfortunately, it is a fair bit lower than we've had in past years, but it's deemed realistic at this point.
Okay, so I wanted to acknowledge the work on guessing what the education levy would be. That's 0% variance is pretty impressive. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I will definitely give credit again to Mr. Dolan for that, for coming up with several options and picking the right one.
Well, you give him kudos from me. And I just wanted to reiterate again, Mr. Scoble, like this, what you brought forward here was a bare bones budget. Like you did not bring in a bunch of luxury items. You again have brought it to council's decision if we want to add luxury items, and that's going to be all on the 7 of us of how we want to do it, or if we want to just increase the budget further. But I've read the entire budget document. You gave it to me last week, so it's your own fault for giving it to me. And I certainly have lots of questions, and I'm going to try to minimize my IRs as much as possible. But you have really, this is your second budget where it was all on you, like the previous one, the first one you inherit in some ways, right? And these are the two that are on you, Mr. Scoble, and you have definitely shown your willingness to try to find staff efficiencies, to really make sure that we do not increase staffing levels relative to the population growths, and to really try to say, how can we do this better? Because there's a lot of criticism, I would say, from people to say, why aren't you looking for more efficiencies? And when people do say that to me, I will tell them, you know, our city manager is very focused on trying to find efficiencies and very focused on bringing in the best budget he can with the circumstances he has. So I just want to give kudos to you for what you've done again. So well done.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To Mr. Scoble, it's an excellent budget, great read. It's been enjoyable going through, having a sneak peek at the business cases and going through and getting our questions organized. So I appreciate the document. I actually have a provincial government question for Mr. Dooley. Looking at Global Edmonton, I see, just like Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board, we pay a fee to belong to that as a shareholder. I didn't see Edmonton Global up on your slides. I do see that they get provincial and federal grants. I wondered if they're going to have sort of a set grant that we can rely on so that we can look at our membership fees a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Hanson, I think traditionally their grants have been more kind of department specific, but yeah, we'll have to monitor that. I can't recall exactly what Alberta Economic Development and Tourism was looking at in terms of any changes, but yeah, we'll have to monitor that for sure.
So essentially, our membership fees kind of top up the grants and give them what they need to work.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and the other question that I had, I always get a little bit nervous about the way that we talk about MSI disappearing into the wind. And in 2 more years, it's going to be the local government fiscal framework. Do we have any idea at all what that is going to look like within this 4-year mandate of the provincial government? Did they talk about that at all?
I guess all I can say from my perspective at this point is it was identified within the government's platform. I don't know when within their mandate it'll be legislated, but that's obviously something we're going to continue to monitor and work through AUMA to ensure that the city's interests are protected through that process.
Yeah, it's going to be advocacy plus. Okay, thanks so much.
There's $405 million earmarked in that LGFF for municipalities other than the 2 big ones. And when I talked to Minister Madhu yesterday, he thinks the allocation will be very similar to MSI. Was it tabled in the ledge today? Does anyone know? It was supposed to be. So then the technical briefings will come and, you know, the conversations, but I think it's going to go pretty fast. But at least it's legislated, which is something we were always asking for, right? I have just 3 more. 2 on provincial budget. Are we sure that we have the grants in place of taxes numbers right? Because it was 50% total. And you said 25% and then another 50. But it's 25 and 25, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. And the other one is we've lost about 1.4 million in MSI. Is that, we had 15.2 and now we're down to 13.8?
That's our estimate right now.
That's an
The
estimate?
official allocations haven't been communicated.
Yet you said we could fund 2020 completely in this budget. When I look at page 59 of the budget document where it says how we're paying for all our capital projects, which is my favorite chart, so thank you for including it. Under MSI, it says we're spending almost the 16.7 million that we have with only $77,000 left over, but I'm seeing a $1.4 million shortfall. So can we really cover all our capital this year?
Yeah, we can, because we have some prior MSI carry forward money, so my staff assures me that we can play the jigsaw puzzle and move stuff around and make it work
I think
for
we're going to
2020.
need to see that a bit clearer because this says that we have 16.8 available and we're spending 16.76.
Yeah, we can maybe put together another
Yeah.
chart that'll provide some clarity around that as well.
Okay, that would help. Oh, and Mr. Scoble, so just one quick question on the operating business cases, and then we can conclude because this really belongs in the budget. But the emergency services 11 personnel covered off by the FTE pool. What do we do next year when we need another? Because we need 30 in total, do we not?
Yeah, so we've got a bit of an FTE pool remaining after this. Most of it is going into this year's, but there is some next year. So there probably would be a tax impact next year with the firefighters we hire. And then the following year, because we need to hire about 10 firefighters over 3 years, we wouldn't have anything. So we are drawing down on our contingency for our staffing as well.
Would it be prudent to spread this pool out over the 3 years and not drain it in the first year and a bit?
Yeah, that's something we can look at. I mean, it would have it has an up and down in terms of tax impact, so that it might be another 0.1 this year or 0.2 this year, but then that's available next year to manage. So.
I'll maybe formulate a BIR to see that, how it looks.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Hughes, go ahead.
Before I do the motion, I have just one more question, if that's okay. The fire hall number 4 that's being proposed, it's in this budget to start forward, and I'm trying to remember because I don't remember all the details, and I know I should have probably photographed it in my brain, but I didn't. So if it does go forward, we're going to need to borrow on that. It's like 20 some million all in, right? So when would that kick in? If we let's say it gets approved this budget, when will that start kicking in?
I'm going to estimate 2022.
Two?
Yeah, would probably be the very first impact, but it wouldn't be the full impact of that as well.
Was it 2024?
Yeah, no, I still think it wouldn't hit probably until 2022.
Because it's going to be built like 3 years from now if it's built, right? Like if it gets approved in this budget, it would go forward for a completion of built in 3 years. Because that's why we're getting the firefighters now, right?
I think it's in 2022 is when the construction
22?
will be happening.
Okay, and then so the tax increases will be 22 and 2023?
Likely, yes.
Okay, just trying to keep everything in my head because there's a lot of stuff coming out down the pipes here, even on the bare bones. I'll bring forward the motion if you like.
Go ahead, that'd be great.
That the proposed City of St. Albert financial plan and 2020 budget be received as information and referred to the special council meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. Thursday, November 7th, 2019.
Any comments?
I think I already made them all, my thousands of questions. I really do appreciate, though, Mr. Scoble, that you're recognizing that we have a lot of needs coming forward that are not really optional, like fire halls and things that are not very sexy but are expensive. And we're trying to balance everything in line. And I think that your intentions here were well done. and the work that staff has put forward on this is well done. And also, the budget document isn't even super huge, so it's easy to go through. So for all of that, thank you. And I look forward to having further discussion on the 7th.
Anyone else before I call the vote? Seeing no one else, call for the vote. Voting's closed. That passes unanimously.